You ever have one of those neighbors who thinks they own the whole street just because they chair the HOA? Yeah, I've got one of those. Her name's Cheryl Whitmore, and she's exactly what you'd expect. Platinum bob, oversized sunglasses even on cloudy days, and a voice that could sand drywall. She calls herself president of the Ridgeview Lakes HOA, like she's running a country, not a cul-de-sac. Anyway, my name's Dean Tiller. I'm a retired firefighter and I've lived on West Oak Drive for 15 years. Bought the place with my wife, raised our son here, paid off the mortgage early. It's a good neighborhood mostly. That was, until Cheryl got elected HOA president 3 years ago and decided to turn the place into her personal kingdom. Now, I own a Class C RV, nothing too flashy, just enough for weekend getaways with my wife. Her name's Willow, by the way. She's a trauma nurse and works nights, so peace and quiet is kind of important to us. I keep the RV parked on the side of our driveway, well within the property line and always covered when not in use. HOA rules say as long as it doesn't block the sidewalk or street, it's allowed for up to 72 hours at a time. I know the rules. I've read that handbook more times than I'd like to admit, but apparently Cheryl disagrees. She came strutting up to my porch last Thursday afternoon with her little clipboard and a matching beige pantsuit that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1998. "Dean," she started, like she was talking to a toddler, "your RV is blocking my view of the lake." I blinked. "The lake?" "Cheryl, you live across the street. I can still see it from my upstairs sewing room, or I could until your giant monstrosity parked there." I looked over my shoulder. My RV was tucked neatly along the side of my driveway, nowhere near anyone's line of sight unless they had X-ray vision or a periscope. "It's within code," I said plainly. "I've got 48 hours left on the 72. I even emailed the HOA when I brought it back. Her lips tightened like she'd bit into a lemon and she scribbled something on her clipboard. "Well, I'm filing a formal complaint. Knock yourself out." I figured that'd be the end of it. I was wrong. The next day, I got a violation notice taped to my mailbox. Not mailed, taped, like a ransom letter. It said I was being fined $500 for obstructing the neighborhood view corridor. That's not even in the bylaws. I checked. Twice, I called Cheryl, and of course she didn't answer. So I showed up to the HOA office, really just the community clubhouse, where she'd set up a desk with a brass nameplate that said President. She was sipping cucumber water like she was at a spa. "This isn't a real violation," I said, holding up the notice. "You made this up." She didn't even flinch. "Dean, the HOA has the right to protect property values. Your RV is an eyesore. I've received multiple complaints." "From who?" I asked. She blinked. "That's confidential." "No, Cheryl, it's not. HOA transparency laws require you to disclose an accuser if a fine is issued. You know that." I could see the twitch in her jaw. She didn't expect me to know the law, but I wasn't just some guy with an RV. I'd spent 20 years filling out incident reports and dealing with city code enforcement. I knew how to read a rulebook and follow a chain of command. She crossed her arms. "Well, maybe the board will vote to change the rule. We've got a meeting next week." That's when I knew she was playing the long game. If she couldn't find me for breaking a rule, she'd try to rewrite the rules to nail me later. Fine. She wanted a show. I'd give her a front row seat. That weekend, I went out to the RV storage lot and brought the big rig home. Parked it entirely on my property, but this time, I rotated it so the rear window complete with blackout curtains faced directly across the street, right into Cheryl's sewing room. I even set up a couple of lawn chairs beside it and invited my buddy Walt over. We grilled burgers, listened to the game on the radio, and waved at Cheryl every time she peeked through her blinds. By Sunday morning, she was pacing her front lawn with her phone glued to her ear. I could hear her from my lawn. "I want the police involved." "He's harassing me." I stepped out with a cup of coffee and called over, "Still within the 72, Cheryl. Got the timer running and everything." She stormed back inside. That night, I checked the HOA website. Sure enough, she'd scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday. Agenda item number 1, new restrictions on recreational vehicle parking. Willow laughed when I showed her. She's really losing it over a parked RV. She's not after the RV, I said. She's after control. Then it's time we remind her she doesn't own this neighborhood. I nodded. I'd already pulled the full HOA charter, highlighted every line about transparency and board responsibilities, and printed out the RV clause. I was ready. What I didn't expect was that someone else had been watching Cheryl too, and they were just about ready to talk, but I'll get to that. First, I had a meeting to attend, and Cheryl had a surprise waiting for her. The Ridgeview Lakes clubhouse wasn't much to look at: a beige stucco box with fading blue trim, and a cracked fountain out front that hadn't worked since the previous board president fell into it trying to hang Christmas lights. Cheryl had commandeered the front meeting room, rearranged the tables into a U-shape, and printed out name placards for every board member. It was about as formal as a lemonade stand trying to pass itself off as a courtroom. I arrived 10 minutes early and found a seat in the back. I didn't wear anything flashy, just jeans and a short-sleeved button-down, but I did carry a manila folder stuffed with copies of Ridgeview's bylaws, the county zoning statutes, and a printout of the state's HOA Transparency Act. I wasn't planning to start a fight. I was planning to end one. The room filled quickly. Cheryl was already seated at the center of the U, flanked by her usual yes men. Doug Withers, who once tried to ban Halloween decorations for satanic implications, and Margot Ellis, whose idea of community engagement was forwarding chain emails about lawn fertilizer conspiracies. They both avoided eye contact as I walked past. 3 other homeowners filed in behind me, and then came the surprise. Marion DeLuca, the treasurer, walked straight over and sat beside me. "Didn't expect to see you back here," I said quietly. She glanced at the board, then leaned in. "You're not the only one she's after." I raised an eyebrow. "She tried to have my daughter's swing set removed last month, claimed it violated the uniform landscaping policy. It's in our backyard." I nodded slowly. "So this isn't just about the RV, she's escalating." Marion looked toward Cheryl. "She thinks she can rewrite the rules to fit her mood, but I've been keeping copies of every expenditure she's pushed through without a vote." That caught my attention. "You saying she's been moving money without board approval?" Marion tapped her purse. "I've got receipts, literal ones." She paid her nephew to repaint the clubhouse exterior. No bids, no vote, just wrote the check. I leaned back, quiet for a moment. Cheryl wasn't just power-hungry, she was siphoning funds and silencing dissent. Cheryl banged her gavel. Yes, she actually brought a gavel, and the meeting began. "Welcome, neighbors," she said, voice syrupy thick. "Tonight we're here to discuss some minor amendments to our vehicle storage policy." I raised my hand. "You'll have a chance to comment during the open forum," she said without looking at me. She launched into her prepared statement, using words like aesthetic harmony and neighborhood prestige as she read off a printed sheet. Her proposed rule would ban all RVs, trailers, and boats from being parked in driveways for more than 12 hours, no exceptions. It would take effect immediately, pending board approval. "Before we vote," she said, "any board members wish to comment?" Doug cleared his throat. "I think this is a smart move. We've got to think about property values." Margot nodded. "I've had people ask if this is a trailer park now." Cheryl looked smug. "Then I motion to approve the new restriction." "I object," Marion said calmly. Cheryl blinked. "You're not the chair." "I'm still a board member," Marion replied, pulling a folder from her purse. "And if we're voting on policy changes, we need to follow procedure. That means public notice, written proposals distributed 72 hours in advance, and proper quorum." Cheryl pursed her lips. "We have quorum." 4 members isn't quorum," Marion said. "Not when the board has 7 seats, 2 of which have been vacant for months. That means we need at least 5 votes. And you didn't send out the proposal ahead of time. That's a procedural violation." The room stirred. Cheryl's composure cracked for half a second before she forced a smile. "Well, then perhaps we'll reschedule the vote." I stood. While we're on the topic of violations, I'd like to address the fabricated fine issued against me last week. Cheryl glared. This is not a grievance hearing. It doesn't need to be, I said. I'm simply alerting everyone here that I've already filed a complaint with the County HOA Oversight Committee. I've also contacted an attorney regarding the unlawful fine and the misuse of HOA funds, which I believe Treasurer DeLuca can confirm. Marion pulled out a color-coded spreadsheet. Here's a full breakdown of unauthorized expenditures over the past 14 months. Doug's eyes widened. Wait, what? Cheryl has been paying family members for maintenance services without obtaining competitive bids or board approval, Marion said. That's embezzlement under state law, Cheryl stood abruptly. This is slander, actually, I replied. It's evidence, and I've already forwarded copies to the district attorney's office. The room fell dead silent, then a voice from the back spoke up. I knew something wasn't right when she told me to stop asking about the community garden funds. Everyone turned. It was Mrs. Patel, who ran the neighborhood's annual garden fair. I requested the ledger 3 times, she continued, and she told me it was lost in a computer crash. I looked at Cheryl. How many crashes has your computer had in 1 year? She didn't answer. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People stood, voices rose, and within minutes, the room was a storm of residents demanding answers. Cheryl tried to gavel them down, but the sound was lost in the shouting. I didn't add anything more. I just handed my folder to Marion and walked out. The next morning, things moved fast. County fraud investigators arrived at the HOA office before noon. I saw the unmarked sedans from my porch and watched 2 suited men carry out a desktop computer wrapped in plastic. Cheryl's car wasn't in the driveway that day or the next. By Thursday, a notice was posted on the clubhouse door. All HOA board activities temporarily suspended pending audit. Willow got home late that night and found me on the porch with a glass of iced tea. Quiet today, she said. Too quiet, I replied. She sat beside me. You think she'll come back? If she does, I said, she'll have a lot more to answer for than a parked RV. She nudged my arm. You did good. I just followed the rules, I said. Something Cheryl never thought anyone would actually do. That weekend, I moved the RV back to the storage lot. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The point had been made, but the story wasn't over yet. There were still empty board seats and a special election was coming. And if Cheryl thought the old rules protected her, she was about to find out what happened when the whole neighborhood decided to rewrite them. The temporary suspension of the Ridgeview Lakes HOA board triggered something in the neighborhood that I hadn't seen since the 4th of July block party back in 2013, a sense of unity. But this time, it wasn't about fireworks and potluck casseroles. This was about taking our neighborhood back. By Monday morning, a notice from the county's Community Governance Oversight Committee was posted on the bulletin board outside the defunct HOA office. The board had been placed under official review pending an internal audit. A 3-person interim review panel from the county would be overseeing operations until a full election could be held. That meant Cheryl's reign was legally over, at least for now. Willow handed me the mail as she headed out for another night shift. Tucked between a pizza coupon and a water bill was a letter with the county seal. It confirmed what I'd already suspected. Cheryl and her cronies were under investigation not just for financial mismanagement, but for criminal misconduct. Specifically, falsifying fines, misappropriation of community funds, and tampering with HOA records. I sat down on the porch, reading every word. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of someone clearing their throat. "Dean," said a man's voice. I looked up and saw a guy in his late 40s, average build, faded polo shirt, and a clipboard under his arm. His name was Randy Briscoe, a landscaper who lived 2 streets over. I'd seen him once or twice at HOA barbecues back when they were still worth attending. "I heard what went down at the meeting," he said, stepping closer. "You lit the match. I think the rest of us are ready to help carry the torch." I gestured to the second chair. You thinking about running? He nodded. I've got 3 kids who bike to school. Cheryl tried to ban sidewalk chalk last year, said it created visual clutter. I kept my mouth shut then. I'm not doing that again. You've got my vote, I said, and probably half the streets. The two of us talked for over an hour. Turns out Randy had been keeping track of something I hadn't: maintenance contracts. Apparently, Cheryl had awarded lawn care for all shared spaces to a company called Greenview Services. On paper, they sounded legitimate. But Randy, being in the landscaping business himself, knew they didn't have a valid county license. He tried to check their listed address once, just an empty lot with a rusted-out trailer and a mailbox duct taped to a fence post. Think she was routing money through a shell company? I asked. I'd bet my mower on it. That got my wheels turning. Marion had already exposed the bogus clubhouse repainting job. If Cheryl was creating fake vendors to funnel HOA dues into, then we weren't just talking about a petty tyrant anymore. This was organized fraud. The next morning, I drove over to the county clerk's office. I requested all vendor contracts signed by the Ridgeview Lakes HOA in the last 3 years. The clerk, a woman with a name tag that read B, raised an eyebrow when she saw the request. Someone else was in here last week asking for those, she said. Same neighborhood? She nodded. Didn't leave a name, but I remember the address, same as yours. Whoever it was, they were one step ahead. I left my contact info and asked B to let me know if they came back. Back at the house, I spent the rest of the day combing through the documents Marion had emailed me. One thing stood out. Over $30,000 had been paid out over the last 2 years to vendors who either didn't exist or shared the same P.O. box. That P.O. box, according to a records search, was registered under the name Elliot Whitmore, Cheryl's nephew. That afternoon, I called Detective Alonzo Grier, one of the investigators who had visited the clubhouse during the audit. I gave him everything: the vendor names, the payments, the shell address. He listened carefully, asked a few questions, and then thanked me for my time. The next day, 2 squad cars showed up at Cheryl's house just after noon. I happened to be trimming the hedges when they knocked on her door. She answered in a peach bathrobe, clearly flustered. They didn't arrest her, not yet, but they entered with a warrant and walked out carrying 2 laptops, 3 banker boxes, and a desktop tower. Cheryl followed them out, yelling about political persecution and privacy violations, but the officers ignored her. An hour later, her car was gone. That evening, Marion called me. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was holding something back. "There's more," she said. "The fund for community emergency reserves, it's empty." I tried to make sense of that. Empty. We're supposed to have at least 20 grand in there. For storm damage, vandalism, legal defense, it's all gone. Transferred out in chunks. Labeled as consulting fees. I didn't know whether to be angry or impressed. Cheryl had turned Ridgeview Lakes into her personal ATM. And nobody noticed because she kept us all distracted with lawn citations and nonsense rules. Marion wasn't the only one reaching out. Over the next week, neighbors stopped by with their own stories. A young couple at the end of the street had been fined over $800 for improper mailbox dimensions. A retired teacher had been forced to repaint her shutters 3 times because the shade of blue wasn't uniform. Another resident found out the HOA had quietly placed a lien on his home over unpaid dues he had receipts for. It was a pattern. Cheryl had weaponized the HOA to shake down anyone who didn't fall in line, and she'd done it quietly, systematically, and with just enough plausible deniability to keep most people from fighting back. But now the tide had turned. The county scheduled a special election to fill the vacant board seats. 7 total. The full board had either resigned or was under investigation. The ballot included Randy, Marion, 2 local business owners, a retired accountant, and after some not-so-gentle prodding from Willow me. I hadn't planned on running, but my name was written in on 15 separate nomination forms. When I asked Willow if she had anything to do with that, she just raised an eyebrow and said, "You're good at putting out fires." This one's just a bit different. Election day felt like a block party. People stood in line down the sidewalk, chatting, shaking hands, swapping stories. The clubhouse hadn't seen this much foot traffic in years. By sundown, the results were in. Every single candidate endorsed by Cheryl's old circle was out. The reform slate myself included one by a landslide. Our first act as the new board was to pass a bylaw requiring full financial transparency. Every receipt, every contract, every transaction would be publicly posted online. Our second act was to hire a third-party organization to audit the past 5 years of HOA records. Then came the lawsuits. Under the county's direction, criminal charges were filed against Cheryl and 2 former board members: embezzlement, wire fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty. The charges carried serious weight. If convicted, Cheryl could face up to 10 years. But the part that brought the neighborhood the most satisfaction: watching a tow truck pull into Cheryl's driveway 2 weeks later and repossess the Lexus she'd bought with a maintenance stipend she'd approved for herself. By the time the trial rolled around, Cheryl's lawyer tried to argue that she was simply misguided and overwhelmed by responsibility. But the paper trail told a different story. So did the testimonies from a dozen residents, each one detailing the fines, threats, and lies they'd endured. The jury delivered its verdict in less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Back on West Oak Drive, things settled into something unfamiliar: peace. No more surprise violations, no more shady contractors, and no more self-proclaimed monarchs with clipboards and gavel fantasies. As for the RV, it's still in storage, but I bring it home now and then, sometimes just for a night, sometimes for the weekend. No one complains. In fact, last Friday, Randy stopped by and asked if I'd take him and his kids up to Lake Morrow next month. I told him I'd think about it. But only if he didn't mind a little classic rock and a lot of campfire chili. He grinned and said, "As long as Cheryl's not invited." We both laughed, because we knew she wouldn't be showing her face around Ridgeview Lakes again. 2 months after the election, Ridgeview Lakes looked and felt like a different place. The lawns still gleamed, the hedges were still trimmed into polite shapes, but the air had shifted. You could feel it in the way people waved again when you walked by. More garage doors stayed open on weekends. Kids chalked up the sidewalks without being chased off. And not once had anyone taped a violation notice to a mailbox. Our new HOA board held open meetings at the community center every second Tuesday. Residents actually showed up now. Randy, now vice president, handled most of the infrastructure concerns. Marion, as treasurer, kept a tight grip on the accounts. I ended up as president, mostly because no one else wanted to deal with vendors or legal paperwork, and I already had a reputation for being hard to push around. It wasn't a glamorous title, but it meant something now, something earned. The deeper the audit went, the darker things got. Cheryl's embezzling wasn't just a case of a few shady payments. She had created a web of fake invoices, non-existent services, and backdated approvals. One of the most damning discoveries came when Marion, sifting through the HOA's digital archive, found a folder labeled Legal Templates. Inside were pre-written violation letters, some with residents' names already filled in, dated months before the supposed infractions occurred. That alone might have been enough to bury her, but what came next changed everything. Marion called me one evening and asked me to come to her house. She didn't explain much, just that she'd found something the auditors hadn't touched. Her place was quiet when I arrived, her youngest already in bed. She led me into the den and pulled out a flash drive. "I was going through the old board's shared drive," she said, "and I found a file labeled Security Footage Archive, thought it was just clubhouse surveillance. But then I opened it." She clicked a few folders and a series of video thumbnails appeared. Each was dated and labeled with a house number. My stomach tightened. "These are people's homes," I said. She nodded. "Not the clubhouse, not public property. These are private driveways, backyards, porch cams." Cheryl had unauthorized feeds from at least 15 residences. I leaned in. You're saying she tapped into people's security systems? No, she installed hidden cameras. We watched one clip dated nearly a year back. It showed a family in their backyard, their kids splashing in an inflatable pool. The camera angle was elevated, as if mounted in a tree or utility pole. Another showed a man unloading groceries from his car in his driveway. Different house, different angle. She used HOA maintenance funds to have contractors install these, Marion said quietly. Probably told them it was for neighborhood safety. It wasn't just a breach of privacy. This was felony-level illegal surveillance. We contacted Detective Grier the next morning. He came in person, reviewed the files, and immediately called in a cybercrimes unit. By the end of the week, the county prosecutor had added 2 more charges to Cheryl's case: unlawful surveillance and wiretapping. The news hit local media like a brick through a window. Cheryl's mugshot made it onto the evening report. The anchor used the phrase "suburban spy ring" more than once. People from neighboring communities started calling our board, asking how we'd uncovered it. Some even asked if we could audit their HOAs, the craziest part. Cheryl still hadn't accepted what she'd done. Her attorney filed a motion to dismiss the surveillance charges as misunderstandings stemming from security concerns. But when the court granted access to her personal emails, the prosecution found clear communications, her writing instructions to a contractor to make sure the camera faces the driveway, not the street, and keep the installation discreet. No HOA logo. The trial was set for early spring. Willow and I sat in the front row of the courtroom on the first day. She was off that week, using up vacation hours she'd been saving for years. She wore a navy blouse, her badge necklace tucked away. I wore a blazer that hadn't left the closet since our son's high school graduation. Cheryl appeared in a charcoal suit, hair pulled into a tight bun, expression blank. No sunglasses, no clipboard, not even a whisper of her old smugness. Her lawyer did most of the talking, but even he looked like he was just going through the motions. The prosecution was thorough. They called residents to the stand, people whose homes had been watched, whose fines had been fabricated, whose mail had been intercepted. One elderly man testified that Cheryl had fined him $600 over a non-compliant fence. He didn't even have a fence. When they played the surveillance footage for the jury, there was a collective shift in the room. Someone in the back gasped. Cheryl looked down and didn't lift her head again for the rest of the day. It took the jury 3 days to deliberate. She was found guilty on all charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, unlawful surveillance, falsification of public records, and abuse of power. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. She called Cheryl's actions a coordinated violation of public trust and a deliberate erosion of community autonomy. Cheryl was sentenced to 9 years in state prison, with no possibility of early parole. 2 of her former board allies received probation and were banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Elliot, her nephew, was fined heavily and ordered to repay all earnings from the fake vendor contracts. The courtroom emptied slowly after the verdict. Willow squeezed my hand as we stood to leave. "You did more than park an RV in someone's line of sight," she said. "You toppled a regime." Outside, the late afternoon sun was warm on the sidewalk. People clustered in small groups, talking in low, relieved voices. It felt like the final scene of something long overdue. Back in Ridgeview Lakes, we held a community celebration the following weekend. Not a festival, not a formal event, just a big, relaxed gathering in the central green. Neighbors brought folding chairs, kids raced around with popsicles, and Marion's oldest set up a projector to show a classic movie on a bedsheet hung between 2 trees. Randy brought his grill. I brought the RV, parked it right where Cheryl used to hold her view corridor hostage. People laughed when they saw it, and someone even taped a fake parking citation to the front bumper that read, "Violation, being too awesome." I left it there all weekend. No one complained. No one blinked. That Sunday night, I sat on the steps of the RV with Willow beside me and watched the stars come out. There were no blinds twitching across the street, no phones pointed in our direction, just the sound of crickets and the occasional distant bark. We'd won. Not just the board, not just the trial. The neighborhood had claimed itself back, and Cheryl. She'd spend the better part of a decade behind concrete walls, far from sewing rooms and fake finds. The view from my driveway had never looked better.